one of your roles, one of your assignments may be that God has assigned you to equip emerging leaders, that you're not going to keep them all.
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host, and I'm joined by Dr. Richard Blackaby.
As always, good to be with you, Sam.
It's always a pleasure, Richard. And this week, we've got a listener question that came in over the wire, as they say. And we're going to try and tackle that today. And so I think what I'll do is sort of read off his question. It comes from John, and he is a pastor. And his question is, my student pastor of 5 years has been offered a position at a bigger church that better reflects how God has been growing him and his ministry and his passion and his skills. We talked today, and he is praying about whether to apply, but I told him I think he should. He has volunteered in our church for a number of years, then he stepped into full-time ministry, even taking a $20,000 pay cut over the past 5 years. I have seen his ministry expand from youth to youth and collegiate, and now collegiate and discipleship. Today he got a call about a discipleship position at a much larger church that seems to fit his skills. But he is well loved at our church, and he would leave an obvious hole. Out here in western Kansas, we don't have a large pool of student pastors, although I'm confident God will provide. My point is, any advice on how to lead our church and staff through this kind of a transition? I'm assuming this position will work out for him. John says that you, Richard, have spoken about leadership change of the main leader, but he does not recall one where the second tier, quote-unquote, leadership, which is still essential to a healthy functioning organization, is in transition. Thank you, and sorry for the long text.
Yeah, that's great. We, of course, and we always enjoy people. We've got some real regular listeners to podcasts and keep up with what we're talking about. And then we'll sometimes just realize, hey, we've never talked about this. Would be interesting to get our perspective. So that's a great question, and certainly a very relevant one. Whether you're in a church or running a business, you're always trying to develop leaders all the way down the line, and after you've invested in them, it's kind of hard to see them go sometimes. And so how do you approach that? And so a couple of thoughts, John, that I'd have for that. One is, obviously, good staff are always hard to come by. You can never have enough good staff. Yeah. And if you get someone on your staff that is really takes the initiative and has a great attitude and is a problem solver and is a team player, boy, you need to value those people. I tell you, it's a real sign of unhealth when organizations don't value good people. And so, obviously, John, it's clear that you do. And so I think, obviously, we want to do everything we can to hold on to good people. So as best we can, I've always felt like with good people, you pay them as well as you can. You try to create jobs that are interesting to them, that give them room to grow, that you're adding responsibility to them. The worst thing is to have a person with a lot of potential, and then you put them in a job where their hands are tied behind their back, and they don't have a chance to stretch and grow and try things and learn things. So obviously, just to start with, when you get a really good person, do everything you can to make that job one that gives a lot of space for them to grow and to keep on expanding and learning and feeling challenged and being appreciated. And sometimes especially when you invest in someone like that, the fact that you, maybe as the senior leader, are taking them under your wing and you're spending time with them, that's a valuable resource, especially to younger leaders. They might be able to even make more money somewhere else, but the senior leader over there might not know them or love them or care about them. And I remember even just when I was a pastor and I was developing some folks, and I had a youth leader at one point, and I would now and then I'd give him an opportunity to preach or something, and then And then I would have them come over to my house afterward, and we'd sit down in the living room and we'd debrief and we'd talk about it, and I'd give them feedback. And I gave him a suit at one point that was too small for me but would fit him, and just trying to get him all set up as best I could. And I think there's a lot of value you can add to a person's life that way. And so you want to do all you can to make it as attractive as possible, to stay with you as long as possible. And secondly, I would just say great leaders tend to develop other great leaders. If you're a mediocre leader, you may tend to develop mediocre leaders. And so I think you obviously want to become the best leader you can be so that you have the capacity to develop other strong leaders. And the problem is when you're developing strong leaders, then they have lots of options, and they keep growing in their capacity. And so one of the downsides if you're a great leader, you're going to have other great leaders who like working with you, because great leaders like working with other great leaders. They want to work with people they respect. And so, but the downside of that is when you develop great leaders is that they've got options and people notice them, and other job offers come along. And so there's the downside of that. But I would still say, don't downsize what you're doing. Go ahead and create the best leaders you possibly can, even if it means you're going to lose some. You don't want to say, I'm going to just get this guy at about 50% capacity so nobody takes him away from me.
Well, because I think you can look at that in two ways. One is if you're really good at developing leaders, they're just going to develop and then leave you. But I think the other side to that is if you're known for developing good leaders, you're always going to attract those leaders who have that potential under you. And so I think, although, it may be sort of a revolving door of you're always watching your good leaders leave, I think the other side of that is I think good leaders or potential good leaders are always going to be lining up to come in.
Yeah. And if you have maybe like an internship program or something like that, people just learn, hey, if you're learning the ropes, if you're starting out, that's a great place to go work, because they give you a lot of room to grow and opportunities and trust and feedback and so on. And I think maybe just kind of piggybacking on that one is just good leaders. They need to grow. They need to keep being stretched, especially earlier on. They want to learn, and so you have to create an environment where they can. And sometimes, especially maybe in smaller churches, there's times where a church will just have a very narrow kind of expectation or job description. We just want you to do these things. Don't do that. Don't get into this. Just do this. And sometimes I think churches are afraid if this person increases their capacity too much, we're going to have to pay them a lot more. So let's keep their job small. But you'll never keep great leaders that way. And so you have to just create an environment where, and don't assume that just because they work for you that it's an environment to grow. You've got to help them grow. You've got to take time to sit down and talk over ministry with them, and you got to expose them to other great leaders, or send them to conferences, or give them a book allowance so they can buy books and be reading. Steer them towards some podcasts that will stretch them and give them some new ideas, and so you do that knowing full well some of these people, because you created an environment to grow, they're going to outgrow your ministry and your job. But you just have to be willing to run that risk, because if people can't grow working with you, you're just not going to attract good people after a while. They're going to go somewhere else. So you have to do that, and you have to also just have to acknowledge that some people will outgrow your church, your company. They just will. They're going to keep growing and learning and stretching, and some of them are going to just get to the point where they're not being challenged anymore. Even though you perhaps have given them lots of opportunities, they've nailed it, and now they really need to do more. And I would just say, and it sounds, John, like this is the case with you, that if you love these people, if you really do care about your staff, you're going to really want what's best for them. And at that point, you really have to just decide, am I going to just do everything based on what is best to preserve my organization or my church, or do I care about these people? And John, it sounds like, if you're encouraging them to look and even apply to other jobs, then you're saying you care about them as a person and you want the best for them. And sometimes wanting the best for people, it means that they're going to leave you. I've known places, literally, I could tell you stories of pastors that if they even talked about possibly going somewhere else or looking at another job, that they would be immediately fired. I knew a guy that just one time just made a comment. He was a youth pastor, and he made a comment that somewhere in his ministry, he thought it might be interesting to try and start a church. I mean, he hadn't started a church. He hadn't done anything in that area. He just off the cuff kind of talked about that. Well, the next day he was notified he was no longer employed at his church because he was even thinking about at some point maybe moving on. And they wanted people that were fully engaged and loyal to them. And so that's just such a harsh way to treat people. Better to create that environment, and then just to realize, well, this will certainly cost me some good people along the way, and there's just no way around it. But a fifth thing would just be help your church to be kingdom-minded. Too many churches are just church-minded. It's just what's best for our church.
Right.
We have good people, and we don't want to lose them. And especially if that person grew up through the ranks of your church. Maybe they grew up in your church. They were a teenager in your church, and now here they are, the youth pastor, and you sort of feel like they belong to us. That's our youth.
Yeah, I think that the homegrown leader can be much harder to let go of for a church.
If you just hired them and they were there for 2 years and you like them, that's one thing. You still may be sorry to see them go, but yeah, when you've raised them up right from your own ranks, and then they outgrow what you've given them to do, a kingdom-minded church or even a kingdom-minded organization is going to say, it's the kingdom's bigger than us, and there are times where people, as they follow God's will, are going to get moved around by the king, and we can't stand in the way of that. And when they prayed and they really sense that God wants them to go to this new assignment, we can't try to thwart that. We can't thwart God's will for their life because we want to keep them ourselves. We want to just be selfish. And so, and that's where you really have to help your church people, because there will always be some folks who'll say, well, I just don't want to lose him. He's such a sweet boy. I used to teach him Sunday school, and now he's on staff and he's ours. And we found him and we helped him. And the kingdom minded said, but the kingdom's not losing him. The king still has him working for him, just in a different assignment now that's not in our church. And so, and kind of going with that is also just be cognizant of the fact that your personal leadership legacy needs to be bigger than just your own organization. And so I think we all, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong to feel like, hey, if I'm leading a church, I want a legacy that says that I grew this church while I was here. And we grew in attendance, and we maybe added buildings, and we added programs, and we did various things, and we planted 3 other mission churches. That's all great, but sometimes some of your legacy may also be just how many other pastors and leaders are out there in various churches today that passed through your church. Maybe youth that were youth or college students at your church at one point, and now they're serving as missionaries on the mission field or as youth pastors in other churches or other states. And that's still part of your legacy. I remember a pastor I knew years ago that had over 100 people who had felt called into ministry that had come through his church, youth, college students, and people that he had mentored along the way and encouraged, and that his church maybe had licensed or voted on to send to seminary. And he would try to meet with them once a year. He would say, maybe at the denominational convention or something, and they'd have a lunch. gathering. All those who came out of our church, now you're serving in other places. We're all going to have lunch together, and he might have a book or something to give to all those folks, and just a gift, and maybe a group email or something, just passing on various quotes or YouTubes or sermons or something. And these people long since had left serving in his church, but that was still part of his legacy, and he took great satisfaction and joy in knowing that in X number of states, in this many different churches, there was someone that came out of our church. And now look at the reach of our church, the influence of our church, that out of our little church now, there's this many dozen other churches all being blessed by someone that we equipped and we encouraged and prepared. And so you're spreading your influence, even if it's not all in your own local church anymore. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you can only have so many youth pastors. And so if you end up over the years cultivating a dozen youth pastors, you only need one necessarily, one main one. And so if you've got 11 others now that are doing youth work in other churches in other states, you're expanding your influence, and not in a prideful way, but just to thank God that with the one life that you have, there's now people that you've invested in that are ministering all over the place. And so you need to have kind of a bigger picture, a perspective on things than just your church. And especially when you're in a smaller church or a smaller organization, you can kind of feel like the pie only has so many pieces, and we don't want to give away a big piece of the pie to someone else. But when you begin to think in terms of kingdom and spreading your leadership influence, so now there's people in a dozen different states that you have discipled over the years, and now they're impacting various states and associations and other places, mission fields. That's a very satisfying way to invest your life, and even for the church to know, well, we've actually trained up over the years this many preacher boys or youth pastors or missionaries that now are touching the world. I remember the church I went to in seminary, they used to always talk about the fact that the sun never set on someone who'd been a member of our church now, because we'd send out missionaries and people all the way around the world. And so in every time zone around the world, there was someone who used to go to our church that was serving the Lord. And they took great pride and satisfaction in that, that our little church is having that kind of influence. And then just a couple other things to say, just there are going to be some people that are going to feel led to move on to other assignments. And there's been times, even with some people in my leadership, that there were times I wasn't quite sure that they were making a wise decision. Sometimes there was a time or two where I kind of thought, you know what, I think they're just chasing after a little bit more money. But there's more to a good job than just getting paid a little bit more. I wasn't sure that some of these folks were going to go somewhere where they would be invested in personally and encouraged and equipped the way that they were with us. And there were times I would think, I'm not sure, as I hear their reasoning, I'm not sure that that's the best. But at the same time, I also had to just trust their walk with God and trust God with the process. And there were times where I might even lose someone that I thought, I don't know that they left. They didn't leave on bad terms, but I just think they were maybe attracted to the wrong things. And oftentimes that would be just more money. And it's not bad to take a job that pays more money, but hopefully there's more to it than that. And yet I would have to just trust that, well, God He's sovereign and He'll watch out for them. And, I remember at least one or two cases where someone left us and it was going to be a big hole. But God always replaced that person with someone. And then even though the person had been a really good employee, then the next person who came in added some new dimensions, and I found delightful to work with and addressed some things, brought some things to the table that the previous person hadn't. And so at the end of the day, you just don't want to be doom and gloom and worried that, oh no, we're going to lose this person. Will we ever have a youth group as good as we had it before, or whatever? It may not be the same, but it might be. There might be some new dimensions in the end that come along. Maybe some parents step up and help out as well, and some different things take place. Maybe some of the youth themselves step up and provide some leadership, and some things happen in their lives as a result. So trust God with that. Don't be afraid if you're going to lose someone. Trust that God's bigger than that. And I know that some places it's harder to find available staff, but it's not impossible for God. And then just realize, view that sometimes as a strategic networking. I've seen before where someone, maybe a church lost a couple of youth pastors, but they ended up serving in other churches, or maybe they lost people to become pastors. But then the places where those people went, they sort of built a network, and so now all of a sudden this church that's given away half a dozen people, there's half a dozen churches out there that all are favorably disposed to your church, and so now maybe you have an area-wide youth rally and some gatherings, and you cooperate and do some things together, or two churches decide to go on a foreign mission trip together, and now you've got some connections, and you've built some bridges with other ministries, and that comes back to help you in other ways. And so I've found it just never hurts to have friends out there in other places, other ministries, other businesses that appreciate what you did for them and would be happy to pass a blessing back on to you, or to work with you in some way. They know what you think, they know how you work, and so they might be great partners for you down the road as well. So you never know how that might come back for you. You certainly don't want to burn bridges. Don't all of a sudden shun someone because they left your church. Bless them, pray for them, celebrate for them. And you just never know when that's going to come back around sometime and become a blessing to you now, because you've got friends now in other churches who appreciate what you did for them. And, of course, work hard if you lose someone to find a suitable replacement. Sometimes it takes a while. I've shared before, one of the mistakes I made was maybe filling spots too quickly when the right person hadn't been discovered yet. It may take a little while, and sometimes that interim time, like I said, it might be that some parents or some youth have to step in for a while and fill in the gaps till you can hire someone. But that might be really good. There might be some parents that end up just becoming very passionate about supporting the ministry, or some youth. I remember when I was a youth, we didn't have a youth pastor. And so I organized things, and we organized a whole youth camp. We went on youth outings where we organized the whole thing, all the logistics and everything, and then just recruited an adult to come along with us, so it was official. And so many of the people that were involved in that youth group at that time are serving as pastors and leaders today. And so when you are in that transition time, keep your eyes open. It's not like God stops working until you have a new youth pastor. There's things that God could do in the meantime.
Yeah, I would say don't waste that transition time, because it is a really unique time in the life of your church.
Yeah.
I think God can do some pretty incredible things when things are not normal.
Yeah.
We've lost our youth pastor. Now we're looking for a new one. I think people can be more attuned and looking to see where God's at work. And I just think some really special things can happen in those transition periods in the life of the church and your members.
Yeah.
That may not happen otherwise.
Yeah. So watch to see what God's doing even in the transition times. And maybe the last two things just to say is, you know what? That one of your roles, one of your assignments may be that God has assigned you to equip emerging leaders, that you're not going to keep them all. That's maybe part of your job. It's just be generous and encouraging and inspiring in the lives of other emerging leaders, and They may start out as a youth pastor for you. They may ultimately become a senior pastor somewhere else, or become a missionary or something, or leading a nonprofit somewhere. But what a wonderful way for you to expand your ministry, not just growing your church, but raising up leaders for the kingdom of God over the course of your ministry and your life. And what a joy! I'm always running into people that will say, "Well, I'm one of so and so's boys," or that person was my pastor that believed in me, and it's always interesting to see folks that just over the course of their ministry now have got all kinds of people that look to them as their mentor, the person that believed in them. And so that may well be one of your parts of your ministry, not just to grow your church, but to grow leaders for the kingdom. And that's a very legitimate ministry. And then just kind of go with that is, sometimes I know that the feeling can be, well, why invest all this time and effort and then they just leave? It's like, you can almost feel as if why just wasted all that investment because they didn't stay here. But of course, it's not wasted. That person, especially if they're still ministering somewhere else, they're still in the fields working. They're in the battle, serving the King, and there's someone that you equipped, and now the kingdom has been expanded by another person who's working. But also, it's going to grow you. There's some things that we grow by, and you found this, if you can go and attend a Bible study, but if you suddenly are teaching a Bible study, you often learn a lot more than if you were just there as a student. And so the fact that you're training emerging leaders is going to build some things into you that wouldn't be there otherwise. And I've often thought, my mom used to think that for years, my dad, when he was a pastor, he ran a Bible college in our church, and we were a lot of college students, a lot of young adults that would be trained. And then most of the time they would end up going out and serving somewhere else, not our church, but they'd go to some other church, or they'd move to another province and help out over there. And so all these people are passing through our Bible college, and then a lot of them are not staying and serving in our church. And so you could kind of think, well, Henry, you're sure spending a lot of time investing in teaching people that and then they just leave the church when it's all done. But my mother used to always say, but you know what? So much of like experiencing God and so much of my dad's theology, he actually worked out as he was teaching these college students. And as he's teaching them how to walk with God, he thinks he's just equipping a bunch of emerging leaders, but he has no idea that God is actually refining his theology and his view of how to walk with God and know his will. And ultimately, a number of books are going to be produced fundamentally because my dad had invested so much time in building up others and helping them know God's will. And then lo and behold, so much of what he's learned in the process of equipping others becomes a huge part of his later ministry and his book writing and teaching ministry. And so it's not, you're never just losing by investing in people, even when they go away, because all the things you've had to think through and the ways you've learned how to teach and encourage emerging leaders, you still have all those skills and all those insights, and you're going to be a much better leader as a result because you did. So, and the church, as they loved on people and then sent them on their way, they're learning how to love emerging leaders, to be patient with them, to encourage them, and that equips your church as well to be a leader developing church. And so those skills still stay there, and so it's not a waste. You're not losing. You might lose the person who's not in your church anymore, but so many of the skills and insights and just Christ-likeness that you develop in the process, you still have that. And as my dad always, as he kind of based a lot of his church on, he always said, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. If you give your life away, you'll save it. And so you just have to be known as a church that gives itself away for the kingdom of God. And God has said you'll never be at a loss because you gave yourself away for the kingdom. The King has ways of replenishing and rewarding and blessing when you do. So way to go, John, for just investing in this person. Be sure to reach back out to us and let us know what happens.
Yeah.
But I just think that that's a great way for a church to invest itself and in the kingdom. And the King has ways of blessing you in return.
Yeah. Well, until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackv.org.